I never knew I had siblings until that day in Bangkok. My mother's response to my discovery was extraordinary. I, 28M, never expected a routine business trip to Thailand would completely shatter everything I knew about my family. The revelation came during a seemingly ordinary afternoon when I was walking through a bustling mall in Bangkok, searching for a gift for my mom. That's when my world tilted on its axis. I saw my father, sitting at an upscale cafe with a woman and two teenagers who bore an uncanny resemblance to him. For a moment, I stood frozen, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. My father was supposed to be in Chicago, overseeing his import-export business like he had for the past 25 years. Yet there he was, conversing fluently in Thai with what appeared to be his other family. I instinctively ducked behind a marble pillar, my heart thundering so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. The teenagers, a boy and a girl who looked to be high school age, shared his distinctive features, the sharp jawline, the prominent nose, even his characteristic way of gesturing while speaking. The woman beside him was elegant and graceful, approximately my mother's age, and the casual intimacy with which she interacted with my father spoke volumes about their relationship. They painted a picture of domestic harmony that made my stomach churn. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and recorded a brief video. I needed concrete evidence that this wasn't some stress-induced hallucination. My father's frequent business trips to Thailand suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. Those 2 or 3 week stays that had been a regular feature of my childhood now felt like pieces of a puzzle I'd been too blind to solve. That evening, I confronted him at his hotel. I had his itinerary because we occasionally coordinated business meetings during these trips. The look on his face when he opened the door and saw me standing there, it wasn't surprise or shock, just resignation. He looked defeated, aged a decade in an instant. "I suppose we should talk," he said, stepping aside to let me enter. The suite was immaculate, with a stunning view of Bangkok's skyline that I barely registered. My father settled into an armchair, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I never intended for you to discover this way," he began, his voice heavy with what seemed like years of carried guilt. "Suri and I met when I was fresh out of college, working on establishing business connections here. We fell in love, but my parents..." He trailed off, running his hands through his graying hair. "They had traditional expectations. They wouldn't accept her. I was young, weak. I caved to their pressure to marry someone from our community. But I couldn't bring myself to abandon Suri. Or later, my children." The word children hit me like a physical blow. "How could you do this to Mom?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "To our family? Do you have any idea what this would do to her?" His response knocked the wind out of me. "Your mother has known for 20 years. I flew back to Chicago immediately after that conversation, driving straight from O'Hare to my parents' suburban home. It was early Sunday morning, and I found my mother in her element, tending to her prized rose garden, pruning shears in hand, looking completely at peace. When I spilled out my discovery, her calm reaction felt almost surreal. "Come inside," she said, removing her gardening gloves. "We should have some tea for this conversation." In our sunny kitchen, she moved with practiced ease, preparing the jasmine tea she'd always favored. "I discovered the truth when the twins were born," she explained, her voice steady as she poured tea into delicate cups inherited from her mother. "Your father was careless with some hospital documentation. I was devastated, of course, angry beyond words. But we had you. The business was flourishing, and our families were deeply interconnected. Divorce wasn't just frowned upon in our community then, it was practically unthinkable. But why stay?" I pressed, struggling to understand. "How could you possibly accept this arrangement?" She set her cup down deliberately, fixing me with a gaze that held decades of hard-won wisdom. "I made a conscious choice. Your father, despite his flaws, is a good man who made a complicated decision when he was young and got trapped in its consequences. He's been an excellent father to you, a reliable provider, and yes, even a good husband in many ways. The situation isn't ideal, but life rarely gives us perfect choices. Suri and I reached an understanding years ago. We've met several times, actually." I nearly spilled my tea. "You've met her? How? When?" "The first time was 15 years ago, when I traveled to Bangkok alone. She's a remarkable woman, intelligent, kind, dignified. We both realized that destroying 2 families wouldn't solve anything. Your father divides his time, his resources, his affection. It's unconventional, but we've made it work. I chose acceptance because sometimes love means embracing imperfect situations and finding peace within them." The weeks that followed were transformative. My father began sharing more about his other family, no longer constrained by secrecy. I learned that my half-brother shares my passion for photography, spending hours capturing Bangkok's vibrant street life. My half-sister is pursuing medicine at one of Thailand's top universities, driven by the same determination I recognize in myself. What struck me most was how my mother handled it all. She would casually ask about them during dinner, genuine interest in her voice. She sends thoughtful gifts for their birthdays, chosen with the same care she shows when shopping for our relatives here. Her capacity for forgiveness and adaptation left me in awe. The ripple effects of my discovery touched every aspect of my life. Business meetings with my father now carried an added layer of complexity. We weren't just discussing profit margins and expansion plans, but also navigating this new emotional terrain. Every family dinner felt different, weighted with unspoken understanding and years of carefully maintained balance. I started seeing my childhood memories in a new light. Those long-distance calls my father would take in his study, speaking in hushed Thai. He wasn't just talking business. The occasional packages he'd send to Thailand, carefully wrapped and labeled, they weren't just for business partners. Even his insistence on teaching me basic Thai when I was younger took on new meaning. The hardest part was maintaining the facade for our extended family and social circle. Every casual question about my father's frequent travels now felt like a trap. Every family gathering became an exercise in careful conversation, avoiding topics that might lead to dangerous territory. I gained a new appreciation for how my parents had maintained this delicate balance for decades. But the weight of the secret also brought unexpected insights. I began to understand the complexity of human relationships, how love doesn't always fit into the neat categories we're taught to expect. My father's actions, while morally questionable, came from a place of trying to honor commitments to two families he loved. My mother's response showed me that strength sometimes lies not in fighting against reality, but in finding ways to accept and adapt to it. The question of meeting my half-siblings loomed large in my mind. My father told me they knew about me, had known for years. While I grew up believing I was an only child, they grew up aware of their brother in America. The thought was both fascinating and terrifying. What would we say to each other? How do you begin to build relationships that should have existed for decades? I found myself studying their social media profiles, these strangers who shared my blood. My half-brother's photography page showed me glimpses of his world, bustling Bangkok streets, serene temples, candid family moments that felt both familiar and alien. My half-sister's academic achievements, proudly shared by their mother, reminded me of my own university days. The timing of this discovery felt significant too. At 28, I was established enough in my career to handle the emotional upheaval, yet young enough to potentially build meaningful relationships with my newfound siblings. If I'd discovered this as a teenager, the rebellion and anger might have torn our family apart. If I'd found out much later, the opportunity for connection might have felt more distant. My mother's wisdom continued to guide me through this period of adjustment. Family, she told me one evening as we sat in her garden, is not about perfection. It's about acceptance, adaptation, and choosing to love despite complications. Your father made choices that affected all of us, but dwelling on what should have been different won't change our reality. The business trips to Thailand took on new significance. Each time my father packed his bags, there was an openness that hadn't existed before. Sometimes my mother would send small gifts with him, books she thought the twins might enjoy, specialty chocolates from their favorite Chicago shop. It was her way of acknowledging and embracing this unconventional family dynamic. I started learning more Thai, moving beyond the basic phrases I knew. Something about understanding the language made me feel closer to that other part of my family, even though we hadn't met. I found myself wondering about cultural differences, about how they viewed this situation from their perspective, about what stories they'd grown up hearing about their American brother. The most surprising change was in my father. Once the secret was out, it was as if a weight had lifted from him. He began sharing stories about the twins' childhood, showing me photos he'd kept hidden for years. In his office, he now openly displayed a picture of all his children, me and the twins, though visitors would assume we were family friends or business associates' kids. 6 months after my discovery, I received an email from my half-sister. It was simple, just a few lines in carefully composed English. We've known about you our whole lives. Mom always made sure we understood that our family was different, but not less valid. When you're ready, we'd love to meet you properly. No pressure, no expectations, just a chance to know each other. That email sat in my inbox for weeks as I contemplated my response. How do you begin a relationship that should have spanned decades? What do you say to siblings who've been shadows in your life, known but unacknowledged? My mother found me one evening, staring at the email on my laptop screen. She sat beside me, her presence comforting in its familiarity. You know, she said softly, accepting them doesn't diminish your place in this family. Love isn't a finite resource that runs out when shared. Sometimes it grows stronger through sharing. I'm still working on my reply to that email. Each draft feels inadequate to express the complexity of emotions involved. But I'm learning that maybe perfection isn't the goal. Maybe it's enough to be honest, to be open to possibilities, to acknowledge that family can be more complicated and more expansive than we ever imagined. This isn't the family story I thought I had, but it's mine now. It's messy and complicated and nothing like the neat narratives we're taught to expect. But there's beauty in its complexity, in the way love can stretch and adapt, in the courage it takes to accept reality rather than cling to illusions. I don't know what the future holds for this expanded version of my family, but I'm beginning to understand that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept that life doesn't always fit into the boxes we try to put it in. Sometimes it spills over, creates new patterns, forces us to expand our understanding of what family and love can mean. And maybe that's exactly as it should be.